I'd been watching the warehouse for 3 hours. The sun was almost gone now, just a thin orange line on the horizon. Perfect timing. Charlotte Simon would be getting ready to hunt soon. I shifted in the driver's seat of my beat-up Corolla, stretching my legs as much as I could. The car wasn't much to look at, but that was the point. Nobody notices a crappy sedan in this part of Sacramento. The industrial district was mostly empty this time of evening anyway. Just a few security guards making their rounds at the active businesses down the street. This warehouse had been abandoned for at least 2 years. Chain-link fence with faded no trespassing signs, broken windows on the upper floor, graffiti on the concrete walls. Charlotte had picked a good spot, isolated, multiple exits, easy access to the homeless population that camped under the nearby overpass. 3 people had gone missing in the last week, all last seen within a mile of here. Patrick had tracked the pattern and given me Charlotte's name yesterday. She wasn't particularly old for a vampire, maybe 150 years, but she'd been careless lately, hungry. That made her dangerous but also easier to find. I checked my watch. 8:15. Time to move. I reached under the passenger seat and pulled out my duffel bag, unzipping it to check my equipment one last time. 5 wooden stakes, each one sharpened to a perfect point and blessed with holy water. My silver knife with the reinforced handle. 4 small vials of holy water, the bag of garlic powder, and my crucifix on its leather cord. I slipped the crucifix around my neck, tucking it under my shirt. The wooden stakes went into the special inner pockets of my coat, 2 on each side and 1 down the back. The knife went into the sheath on my belt. Holy water vials distributed in my coat pockets where I could reach them quickly. The garlic powder went into a pouch on my belt. Everything in its place, everything ready, just like always. I got out of the car, locked it, and walked casually toward the warehouse. No point in drawing attention by sneaking around. If anyone saw me, I'd just look like another guy checking out an abandoned building, maybe looking for scrap metal to steal. The fence wasn't much of an obstacle. I found a section where someone had already cut through, probably months ago. The gap was just big enough to slip through without tearing my clothes. I made it to the shadow of the building without seeing any movement inside. I circled the warehouse slowly, staying close to the wall. The main entrance was chained shut, but there was a side door that looked promising. A loading dock door on the far side was partially open, but I didn't like it. Too exposed. A smaller personnel door next to it was locked but looked manageable. I approached the personnel door carefully, listening for any sound from inside. Nothing. I pulled out the pouch of garlic powder and sprinkled a thin line along the top of the door frame, then along the bottom. Vampires hate the stuff. Won't cross it if they can help it. Means she'd have to use another exit if she tried to run. The lock was old and simple. I had it open in under a minute with my picks. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open, and I froze, listening. Still nothing. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The warehouse was dark except for faint moonlight coming through the broken windows above. I pulled out my small flashlight but kept it pointed at the floor, just enough light to avoid tripping over anything. The beam showed concrete floor covered in dust, old pallets, and random trash. I moved slowly, placing each foot carefully to avoid making noise. The air was stale and smelled of mold and rat droppings, but underneath that was something else, a faint coppery smell. Blood. Recent too. The main floor was mostly empty, a few old shipping crates, some broken machinery. A staircase along the far wall led up to a second-floor office area. I made my way toward it, stopping every few steps to listen. A crash from above broke the silence, something metal hitting concrete. I switched off my flashlight and pressed myself against a support column, waiting. No more sounds followed. She knew I was here. I pulled out one of the stakes and held it ready in my right hand. With my left, I reached for a vial of holy water, uncorking it with my thumb. Then I started up the stairs, testing each step before putting my weight on it. The third step creaked loudly, and I paused again. Still nothing. The second floor was divided into several small office spaces. Most of the walls had collapsed, leaving just metal framing. Old desks and filing cabinets were scattered around, covered in dust and bird droppings. Moonlight streamed through the broken windows, creating patches of dim light between deep shadows. I moved from shadow to shadow, scanning each corner. The blood smell was stronger up here. I checked behind an overturned desk and found the source. A body, male, probably in his 30s. His throat had been torn open. He'd been dead less than a day. A soft scraping sound came from behind a stack of shipping crates in the far corner. I moved toward it, keeping low. As I got closer, I could hear breathing, ragged and uneven. I peered around the edge of the crates. Charlotte was crouched there, her back to the wall. She looked weakened, probably from the garlic I'd spread at the entrance. Her skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent in the moonlight. Long black hair hung in tangles around her face. Her clothes, what looked like a black sweater and jeans, were stained with dried blood. She hadn't noticed me yet. I took another step forward, and a piece of broken glass crunched under my boot. Her head snapped up, and her eyes locked onto mine. They were completely black, no whites visible. Her lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing elongated canines. "Hunter," she hissed. I didn't waste time talking. I lunged forward, stake raised, but she was faster than I expected. Even weakened, vampires move quick. She launched herself at me, fingers curved into claws. I tried to dodge, but she caught my shoulder, her nails tearing through my coat and into the skin beneath. I pivoted and swung the stake, but she was already past me. "You smell like others I've killed," she said, her voice raspy and cold. "So many little hunters, so many little deaths." She circled me, looking for an opening. I kept the stake between us, tracking her movements. The cut on my shoulder burned, but I couldn't feel blood flowing, just a scratch. "You're the one dying tonight, Charlotte," I said. No point in pretending I didn't know who she was. She laughed, a horrible sound like broken glass. "You know my name. Should I be flattered? Did the church send you? Or was it the little secret government team?" I didn't answer. Vampires like to talk, distract you. I wasn't falling for it. She lunged again, faster this time. I wasn't ready. She slammed into me, knocking me back toward the support beam. Her hand closed around my throat, nails digging in. Her strength was incredible. I couldn't breathe. I brought the holy water vial up and splashed it toward her face, but she jerked away. Most of it missed, just a few drops hitting her cheek. But it was enough to make her release me. The drops sizzled on her skin like acid, and she screamed in pain and rage. I gasped for air and tried to bring the stake around, but she recovered too quickly. Her fist connected with my chest, sending me flying backward. I hit the support beam hard enough to knock the wind out of me. The stake clattered to the floor. Pain shot through my back and ribs. I slid down to one knee, trying to catch my breath. Charlotte stalked toward me, smiling now. "Pathetic," she said. "I'll drain you slowly. Make you watch as I drink your life." I reached into my coat and pulled out another stake. She laughed again. "Still fighting? Good. I like it when they fight." She lunged a third time. I was ready. I rolled to the side, and she missed me by inches. As she turned, I pulled out another vial of holy water and threw the entire contents directly at her face. The holy water hit her full on. Her scream this time was deafening, raw agony as her skin bubbled and burned. She clawed at her face, stumbling backward. I didn't waste the opportunity. I pushed through the pain in my ribs and charged, stake held with both hands. She was still screaming when I drove it into her chest, right through the heart. Her scream cut off instantly. She looked down at the stake, then up at me, her blackened face a mask of shock and rage. Then she started to crumble, her skin turning gray, then black, then falling away like ash. In seconds, all that remained was a pile of dark dust on the concrete floor and the empty clothes she'd been wearing. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath. My ribs ached and my shoulder stung where she'd scratched me, but I was alive. She wasn't. That's what mattered. I picked up the stake I'd dropped earlier and returned it to my coat. Then I pulled out a small bottle of holy water and carefully cleaned both stakes and my knife, even though they hadn't made contact with her. Better safe than sorry. Vampire blood is acidic. It'll eat through metal if you let it. I scattered Charlotte's ashes with my boot, mixing them with the dust on the floor. No evidence for anyone to find. Nothing to raise questions. I knelt beside the pile and said a quick prayer for her victims. Not for her. There's no salvation for vampires. When I was done, I made my way back downstairs and out through the same door I'd entered. My car was still the only one in sight. I got in, started the engine, and pulled out my phone to call Patrick. The job was done. Time to report in. I dialed Patrick's number from a payphone near the gas station. I didn't like using my cell for this. Too easy to track. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. "It's done," I said. "Evan." Patrick's voice carried that familiar Irish lilt. "Charlotte has been eliminated?" Yes, found her in the warehouse. One victim on site, male, 30s, already dead when I got there. God rest his soul. I heard Patrick sigh. Any complications? I rolled my shoulder, feeling the sting where Charlotte's nails had broken skin. Nothing serious. She was stronger than the file suggested. Faster too. Are you injured? Scratches. Bruised ribs. I've had worse. You should get those scratches cleaned properly. Their blood, I know, already handled it. I'd disinfected the wounds in the motel bathroom. Vampire blood was acidic. Even a small amount in an open wound could cause serious infection. Good. Patrick paused. I'm afraid I have another assignment for you. I checked my watch. Not even midnight yet. Where? Portland. 3 bodies found drained of blood near the waterfront in the past 6 months. Local authorities think they're dealing with a serial killer. Name? Amber Wells. Turned approximately 80 years ago according to our records. She's been operating carefully, spacing out her kills. Pattern? Nightlife. Clubs. Targets young men, usually intoxicated. Makes it look like they wandered off and fell into the river. The bodies that have been recovered show the classic signs. Puncture wounds disguised by larger trauma, complete exsanguination. I committed the details to memory. Address? Nothing specific yet. She frequents the clubs along the waterfront district. Witnesses described a woman with auburn hair, mid-30s in appearance, usually wearing upscale clothing. She's careful, Evan. Doesn't take victims directly from the clubs. History. Limited information. We believe she was turned during Prohibition. Operated in Chicago for decades, then disappeared in the 70s. Resurfaced in Seattle briefly in the 90s. Portland appears to be her newest hunting ground. I nodded, though Patrick couldn't see me. Anything else I should know? She's territorial, won't venture far from her established hunting grounds. That should help narrow your search. Patrick cleared his throat. The police have increased patrols in the area after the latest body. You'll need to be careful. Always am. I'll transfer funds to your account for expenses, the usual amount. I'll head out tonight. God be with you, Evan. Patrick's voice softened. And please, check in when you arrive. I will. I hung up and walked back to my car. The motel was just a few miles away. I'd check out, grab my things, and start the drive north. Portland was about 8 hours from Sacramento. If I left now, I could be there by morning. Back at the motel, I packed quickly. I traveled light, 1 duffel for clothes and personal items, another for my equipment. I checked out at the front desk, paying cash for the 2 nights I'd stayed. Checking out already, Mr. Stone? The desk clerk barely looked up from his magazine. Job finished early, I said. He handed me a receipt. Have a good night. I loaded my bags into the trunk of my Corolla and hit the road. The highway was nearly empty this time of night. I kept the radio off, preferring the silence. Helped me think. Amber Wells. 80 years as a vampire meant she'd be strong, experienced. The older they got, the more dangerous they became. But they also got set in their ways. Predictable. I'd use that against her. I stopped once for gas around 4 in the morning, grabbed coffee and a sandwich from the attached convenience store. The cashier gave me a tired nod as I paid. I was back on the road 5 minutes later. The sun was rising as I crossed the Oregon border. Morning traffic started picking up, but I maintained a steady pace. No reason to speed, no reason to draw attention. Just another car on the highway. I reached Portland around 8. The city was waking up, people heading to work, going about their normal lives. No idea what hunted in their midst. That's how it always was. People refused to see the darkness until it was too late. I found the Riverside Inn easily enough. 3 stories, brick facade, overlooking the Willamette River. Not too cheap, not too fancy. The kind of place where people minded their own business. How long will you be staying with us? The woman at the reception desk smiled professionally. Not sure yet, at least a week. Business trip. I handed her a credit card with the name James Parker on it. We have a room on the 2nd floor, Riverview. That's fine. She ran my card and handed me a key card. Room 217, elevator is to your right. Checkout is at 11, but if you need to extend your stay, just let us know. Thanks. The room was standard. Queen bed, desk, TV, bathroom. but it had a decent view of the river and the downtown area beyond. I could see some of the clubs from here, their signs still lit though they'd closed hours ago. I unpacked my clothes first, hanging them in the closet to remove the wrinkles. Then I set up my equipment on the desk, maps of the waterfront district, newspaper clippings about the murders I'd printed out at a library on the way into town, and a small kit for maintaining my weapons. I called Patrick from the room phone to let him know I'd arrived. Then I showered and slept for 6 hours. When I woke, it was late afternoon, time to start gathering intelligence. For the next 2 days, I walked the waterfront district, learning the layout. During daylight, I visited the areas where the bodies had been found. All 3 had been discovered in the water, washed up along different stretches of the riverbank. The police had increased patrols, just like Patrick said, but they were looking for a human killer. They had no idea what they were dealing with. At night, I observed the clubs from a distance. There were 5 main ones along a 2-block stretch, all catering to different crowds. I watched the patterns of the bouncers, the peak hours, the types of people going in and out. I was looking for Amber, but also learning the terrain for when I would eventually confront her. On the second night, I spotted her. Auburn hair, just as Patrick had described. She wore a dark blue dress that looked expensive, heels that clicked sharply on the sidewalk as she walked. She moved with the confidence of a predator, surveying the line outside one of the clubs before bypassing it entirely. The bouncer nodded to her as she entered. A regular. I didn't follow her inside, not yet. I needed to understand her hunting pattern first. I found a coffee shop across the street with a clear view of the club entrance and settled in for a long wait. She emerged 3 hours later, around 1 in the morning. She wasn't alone. A young man, maybe mid-20s, stumbled slightly as they walked. Drunk, easy prey. They headed north along the waterfront, away from the main strip of clubs. I followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows. They stopped at a viewpoint overlooking the river. The young man tried to kiss her, but Amber pulled back, said something I couldn't hear. Then she checked her phone and frowned. She spoke again, and the man looked disappointed. He walked away, back toward the clubs. Amber had changed her mind. Maybe she'd sensed something off. Maybe he wasn't drunk enough. Whatever the reason, she'd let him go. She waited until he was out of sight, then headed back to the clubs herself. She repeated this pattern the following night, entered a different club, emerged with a different man, but ultimately sent him away too. She was being cautious. The increased police presence had made her more selective about her victims. Good. That would give me time to prepare properly. Back in my hotel room, I reviewed what I'd learned about Amber Wells and mapped out a plan. I'd developed rules over my 20 years of hunting. Rules that kept me alive while other hunters ended up dead, or worse, turned. Rule 1. Never confront a vampire in their lair during daylight. It sounds counterintuitive, but vampires are most dangerous when cornered in their safe place. Better to catch them while they're hunting, when their focus is divided. Rule 2. Always have an escape route. Every confrontation needs a backup plan. Vampires are stronger and faster than humans. Sometimes retreat is the only option. Rule 3. Use their patterns against them. Vampires are creatures of habit, especially the older ones. Amber's hunting ritual would be her weakness. Rule 4. Never rush. Patience is more important than bravery. I'd watch Amber for as long as necessary until I identified the perfect moment to strike. Rule 5. No witnesses. Civilian casualties were unacceptable, but so were witnesses. The world wasn't ready to know about vampires. The panic would do more harm than good. I cleaned my steaks and knife, blessed fresh vials of holy water, and checked my supplies of garlic powder. Everything was in order. I would continue observing Amber for another night or two, then make my move when the time was right. 20 years of hunting had taught me to respect these creatures without fearing them. Fear leads to mistakes, and with vampires, mistakes are fatal. I set up in the alley just after midnight. It was a good spot, narrow enough to stay hidden, wide enough to move if I needed to. The brick walls on either side kept me in shadow while I could still see both club entrances. The bass from Vortex nightclub thumped through the wall to my left. The other place, Waterfront, was quieter, but had a steady stream of people going in and out. Perfect hunting grounds for Amber. I'd been watching her for 2 nights now. She was careful, patient. Each night she'd pick someone, follow them out, but then back off at the last minute. The increased police presence had her spooked, but tonight felt different. The cops were spread thin with some event across town. I adjusted my gear under my dark jacket, 5 stakes in their special pockets, silver knife at my belt, 4 vials of holy water, plus 2 extras I'd added tonight. The crucifix hung against my chest under my shirt. I was ready. The temperature had dropped into the low 50s. My breath made little clouds in the air. I stamped my feet to keep the blood flowing. Waiting was the hardest part of hunting. Your mind wanders. You start thinking about the past. A burst of laughter pulled me back as 3 women stumbled out of Vortex, arms linked, heading toward the river. Not Amber's type. She only hunted men, specifically young drunk ones, who wouldn't be missed right away. I checked my watch. 1:15 a.m. Most of the clubs would close at 2. If her pattern held, she'd make her move soon. At 1:30, I spotted her. Amber Wells stepped out of Vortex in a tight black dress and heels, looking exactly like Patrick's description. Auburn hair, sharp features, pale skin. She moved with unnatural grace, scanning the crowd like a predator. Her eyes locked onto a guy weaving along the sidewalk. Young, early 20s, college type. He wore jeans and a wrinkled button-up shirt, and he was definitely drunk. He stopped to check his phone, almost dropping it, then continued walking north toward the river viewpoint, away from the crowds. Amber followed, keeping about 30 feet behind him. I slipped out of my alley and trailed them both, staying in the shadows. The street was mostly empty now. The kid stumbled again, catching himself against a lamppost. Amber closed the distance. I needed to time this right, not too early, not too late. "Hey," she called to him, her voice musical. "You okay there?" He turned, his face brightening when he saw her. "Yeah, I'm good. Just celebrating the end of finals." "I'm Amber." She moved closer, touching his arm. "What's your name?" "Jeffrey. Jeffrey Sullivan." He tried to stand straighter, trying to look sober and failing. "Well, Jeffrey Sullivan, you look like you could use some fresh air. The river view is beautiful this time of night." I moved faster, cutting through another alley to get ahead of them. They were heading for the same viewpoint she'd taken the other men to, a small platform overlooking the water, partially hidden by trees. Perfect for an attack, terrible for Jeffrey. I reached the spot first and positioned myself behind a large oak tree. Moments later, they arrived. "Wow, you're right, it's pretty out here," Jeffrey said, his words slurring slightly as he looked at the water. Amber's posture changed. Her movements became more fluid, predatory. She stepped behind him, her hand on his shoulder. "Do you believe in vampires, Jeffrey?" He laughed. "Like in the movies? Nah." "That's good." Her eyes began to glow red in the darkness. "It's better that way." I stepped out. "Let him go, Amber." She whipped around, keeping one hand on Jeffrey's shoulder. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "Hunter!" she hissed. Jeffrey looked confused. "You know each other?" "Run," I told him, pulling out a vial of holy water. Amber's grip tightened on Jeffrey. "Stay where you are." I uncorked the vial and threw the contents directly at her face. The holy water hit her cheek and forehead, sizzling on contact. She shrieked, releasing Jeffrey as her skin bubbled and smoked. "What the hell?" Jeffrey stumbled backward. "Go, now!" I shouted. He didn't need to be told again. He turned and ran back toward the clubs, tripping once but keeping his feet. Amber touched her face where the holy water had burned her. The damage was already healing, but she was furious. "You'll pay for that." I pulled out my stake with my right hand, silver knife with my left. 80 years is a good run, Amber. Time to end it. She circled me like a predator, staying just out of reach. Her eyes glowed bright red now, her canine teeth elongated into fangs. The church still sending little soldiers to die? I didn't answer. Talking was a distraction. Charlotte had tried the same trick. Amber was faster than Charlotte had been. Nighttime gave vampires their full strength, and Amber was using hers. She moved in a blur, darting at me from the right, then changing direction at the last second. Her claws raked across my jacket, tearing the fabric but missing my skin. I slashed with the silver knife, catching her forearm. The blade cut deep and she hissed as the wound smoked. Silver burns vampire flesh. She retreated a few steps, examining her arm. "You know your tools, Hunter, but you're still human, slow, fragile." This time when she charged, I was ready with the stake. I thrust it toward her heart, but she was too quick. Her hand caught my wrist, stopping the stake inches from her chest. Her grip tightened, twisting until pain shot through my arm. The stake fell from my numb fingers. Her strength was incredible. She kept twisting, and I felt something in my wrist about to give. I still had the knife in my left hand, but couldn't get the angle to strike. With my right hand immobilized in her grip, I reached for another vial of holy water in my jacket pocket. "I can smell your fear," she whispered, leaning closer. "It makes the blood sweeter." I pulled the cork with my teeth and poured the holy water directly over our joined hands. The effect was instant. The liquid sizzled and smoked where it touched her skin. She screamed, releasing my wrist as her hand blistered. I stumbled backward, my wrist throbbing with pain. I didn't waste the opening. Moving quickly, I dropped to one knee and snatched up the fallen steak from the ground. My fingers closed around the smooth wood, the familiar weight settling in my palm. Amber was already recovering, the supernatural healing beginning to work on her burns. "You'll die for that," she hissed, baring her fangs. I tightened my grip on the stake and lunged forward. She was fast. Vampires always are, but the holy water had slowed her down just enough. She tried to sidestep, but I anticipated the move, adjusting my trajectory mid-strike. The stake connected with her chest. I felt the initial resistance as it hit her sternum, then the give as it punched through. I drove it in deeper with both hands, ignoring the screaming pain in my injured wrist. Amber's eyes widened in shock. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked down at the wooden stake protruding from her chest, her hands rising to touch it in disbelief. "This is for your victims," I said quietly. The change happened quickly. Her skin turned ashen gray, cracks spreading across her face like a shattered porcelain doll. Her body began to crumble inward, flaking away into dust. Within seconds, all that remained of Amber Wells was a pile of dark ash on the ground. Her empty clothes collapsed around it. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath. My wrist throbbed, and I could feel blood trickling down my face from where she'd caught me with her claws. I hadn't even noticed that injury in the heat of the fight. "Hey, what's going on over there?" I froze at the sound of a woman's voice. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, bobbing as two figures approached at a quick pace. Police. Just what I needed. I quickly kicked at Amber's clothes, trying to scatter them, but there wasn't enough time. The officers were already rounding the corner of the path, their flashlights landing squarely on me. "Police! Don't move!" the female officer called out. I raised my hands slowly, wincing at the pain in my wrist. "I'm not armed," I said, which wasn't entirely true. I still had the silver knife sheathed at my belt, but my jacket mostly covered it. The two officers approached cautiously, flashlights trained on me. The woman was shorter, maybe 5'5", with black hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Her partner was a taller black man, probably mid-40s, with the weathered look of a veteran cop. "What happened here?" the female officer asked, her eyes taking in my torn jacket and the blood on my face. "I was attacked," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Someone jumped me." The male officer circled around, his flashlight beam sweeping over the pile of ash and empty clothes where Amber had been. "What's this?" he asked, crouching down to examine it. "It was already here when I came to," I said. "After the attack." The female officer holstered her weapon but kept her flashlight on me. "I'm Officer Gross. This is Officer Sharp. Can I see some ID, please?" I nodded, slowly reaching into my back pocket to pull out my wallet. I handed over the fake driver's license with the name James Parker on it. "Mr. Parker," Officer Gross said, examining the ID. "What exactly happened tonight?" "I was walking back to my hotel after having a few drinks," I explained, the practiced lie coming easily. "Someone came up behind me. I turned around and they threw something in my face, some kind of chemical. It burned. When I could see again, they were gone." Officer Sharp was still examining the ash pile with a frown. "And you have no idea what this is?" I shrugged. "Like I said, it was here when I got my bearings back. Maybe someone had a bonfire or something." "In the middle of a walkway?" Officer Sharp didn't sound convinced. "What direction did your attacker go?" Officer Gross asked. I pointed away from the direction of the clubs. "That way, I think. It happened pretty fast." Officer Gross handed back my ID. "You should get those cuts looked at, Mr. Parker. There's an urgent care about 6 blocks from here that's open all night." "I'll be fine," I said. "I've got a first aid kit at my hotel." "Where are you staying?" Officer Sharp asked, finally standing up from the ash pile. "Riverside Inn," I said. Room 217. Officer Gross pulled out a small notepad. We'll need to file a report. Can you give us a description of your attacker? I gave them a vague description. Medium height, dark clothes. Couldn't see their face clearly. Nothing that would lead to anything, but enough to satisfy the report. What brought you to Portland, Mr. Parker? Officer Sharp asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Business, I said. I'm in sales. Medical equipment. Officer Gross wrote something in her notepad. And how long have you been in town? 3 days, heading back to Sacramento tomorrow. The officers exchanged a glance I couldn't quite read. Well, Mr. Parker, Officer Gross said, we'll file this report. If you remember anything else about your attacker, please contact the station. She handed me a card. Will do, I said, pocketing it. You sure you don't need medical attention? Officer Sharp asked, eyeing the blood on my face. I touched my cheek and felt the sticky wetness. I'm sure. Like I said, I've got supplies at my room. They didn't look entirely satisfied, but there wasn't much they could do. I wasn't acting suspicious enough to detain, and they had no reason to arrest me. Be careful heading back, Officer Gross said. We'll have a patrol car sweep the area for your attacker. I nodded. Thanks, officers. They watched me as I walked away, heading back toward the main street. I could feel their eyes on my back until I rounded the corner and was out of sight. Only then did I let my shoulders slump slightly, the adrenaline starting to wear off. The walk back to the Riverside Inn took about 15 minutes. I kept to well-lit streets, not because I was afraid. The only dangerous predator in this area was now a pile of ash, but because I didn't want to run into any more police. One encounter was enough for the night. When I reached my room, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, taking stock. My wrist was swollen and painful, but not broken. The cuts on my face stung, and my ribs ached where Amber had struck me earlier. I stripped off my torn jacket and shirt, tossing them onto the bed. The bathroom mirror revealed 3 parallel gashes across my left cheek where Amber's claws had caught me. Not deep enough for stitches, thankfully. I opened my medical kit and got to work. First, I cleaned the facial wounds with antiseptic, wincing at the sting. Vampire claws aren't venomous like their bites can be, but infection is still a risk. I applied butterfly bandages to hold the edges of the cuts together, then wrapped my wrist in an elastic bandage for support. When I was done, I swallowed 2 painkillers with a glass of water and sat on the edge of the bed. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:24 a.m. Too late to call Patrick, even though he'd want to know the job was done. It could wait until morning. I checked the locks on the door and windows, drew the curtains tight, and placed one of my remaining steaks on the nightstand within easy reach. Old habits. I knew there were no other vampires in the immediate area. Patrick's intelligence was reliable, but 20 years of hunting teaches you never to let your guard down completely. Sleep came in fits and starts, my body too keyed up from the fight to fully relax. When the first light of dawn filtered around the edges of the curtains, I gave up trying and took a hot shower instead, careful to keep my bandages dry. At 7 a.m., I called Patrick from the room phone. "It's done," I said when he answered. "Evan," Patrick's voice carried his familiar Irish lilt. I was beginning to worry. No complications? Nothing I couldn't handle. I didn't mention the police encounter. No need to worry him. Amber Wells is eliminated. Any witnesses? No, I said. Technically, Jeffrey Sullivan had seen something, but he'd been drunk and confused, and he hadn't seen the staking. Her victim got away safely. He was too intoxicated to understand what was happening. "Good work," Patrick said. "How soon can you be ready for your next assignment?" I glanced at my bandaged wrist. "I need a day or two. Minor injuries." "Anything serious?" "No, just the usual." Patrick was quiet for a moment. I could hear papers rustling on his end. "I've been tracking reports from Seattle. Possible nest forming in the industrial district near the port." A nest? That was unusual. Vampires are typically solitary predators. They don't like competition for feeding grounds. 3, possibly 4 vampires working together, Patrick confirmed. Unusual, I know, but the pattern of killing suggests coordination. I frowned. A nest would require a different approach. 1 vampire at a time is challenging enough. Multiple vampires working together would be extremely dangerous. "I'll need more intel before going in," I said. "Of course. I'm still gathering information. Take 2 days to recover, then head to Seattle. I'll have a package waiting for you at the usual drop point with everything we know." "Understood." "And Evan," Patrick added, his voice softening slightly. "Well done with Amber. That's another predator stopped." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I'll check in when I reach Seattle." I hung up and sat back on the bed, considering the news about Seattle. A vampire nest was rare and concerning. If they were organized enough to coordinate their hunting, they'd be organized enough to defend themselves. I looked at my reflection in the mirror across the room, the bandaged face, the wrapped wrist. I needed those 2 days to heal. Going up against multiple vampires at anything less than full strength would be suicide. I began mentally preparing for what I'd need. More stakes, definitely. Extra holy water. Perhaps some modifications to my usual approach. One thing at a time, though. First, I needed to check out of this hotel and find somewhere less conspicuous to spend the next day or two. Somewhere the police officers wouldn't think to look if they got curious about James Parker and his suspicious ash pile. I checked out of the Riverside Inn at 7 in the morning, paying cash for the last night even though I was leaving early. The desk clerk barely looked up from her phone. That suited me fine. The less people remembered about James Parker, the better. My wrist still throbbed, but the elastic bandage helped. The scratches on my face looked worse in the daylight, 3 angry red lines that the butterfly bandages barely covered. I'd need a better explanation than chemical attack if anyone asked. I loaded my duffels into the trunk of my Corolla, scanning the parking lot for any sign of officers Gross and Sharp. Nothing. Just morning commuters hurrying to their cars with travel mugs of coffee. I slid behind the wheel and winced as my bruised ribs protested. 20 minutes later, I pulled into a long-term parking garage near the train station. 5th floor, back corner, away from security cameras. I paid the weekly rate in cash and pocketed the receipt. The Corolla would be fine here for a few days. I grabbed both duffels and took the stairs down. My ribs complained with each step. At street level, I walked 3 blocks to a dingy pawn shop with bars on the windows. A bell jangled when I pushed through the door. The owner, a heavy-set guy with a graying beard, looked up from a stack of paperwork. "Help you?" "Need to access my storage," I said, placing a key on the counter. He nodded, no questions asked. That's why I'd chosen this place 6 months ago when I'd set up my Portland contingencies. The owner took cash, minded his business, and provided access to private storage lockers in the basement. Downstairs, I unlocked a metal locker about the size of a mini fridge. Inside sat a motorcycle helmet, leather jacket, and saddlebags. I transferred essential supplies from my duffels: 2 steaks, the silver knife, 3 vials of holy water, basic clothes, and my medical kit. The rest I left locked in the storage unit. Back upstairs, I handed the owner $300 bills for another 6 months of storage. He wrote out a receipt without asking for ID. "One more thing," I said. "Where's the nearest place to buy a used motorcycle? Nothing fancy." He scratched his beard. "Couple miles east. Gray's Motors. Tell him Joey sent you. Might knock 100 off." I nodded my thanks and headed out. 3 hours later, I was northbound on I-5 astride a second-hand Kawasaki Ninja. Not my first choice, but it was reliable and available without paperwork. The wind cut through my jacket despite the April sunshine. But I didn't mind. The cold kept me alert, and the pain in my ribs and wrist reminded me to stay focused. After 20 years hunting, I'd learned that routine meant death. Patterns got you killed. The Corolla in Portland, the motorcycle to Seattle, then something else for the next job. Always changing, always moving. The highway stretched ahead, traffic thinning as I left Portland's suburbs behind. Trees flanked both sides of the interstate now, a green blur in my peripheral vision. I had about 3 hours of riding ahead. Plenty of time to think. I'd been hunting vampires for 20 years now. Started when I was barely out of my teens. Too young to know better. Too stubborn to quit once I learned what it really meant. 2 decades of moving from city to city, tracking the predators that most people didn't believe existed. 20 years of motel rooms, fake names, and nights spent watching abandoned buildings and dark alleys. The bike hummed beneath me as I eased around a slow-moving semi. My mind drifted back 15 years to the hunt that changed everything. I'd been working with a partner then, Michael Estrada. He was 10 years older, more experienced. Taught me most of what I knew about tracking. We'd been hunting a nest in Phoenix, following a string of killings that local police had attributed to a serial killer. Always check the bodies, Michael had told me. Cops see what they expect to see. We look for what they miss. We'd found 3 vampires sharing an old house on the outskirts of town. The plan was simple. Hit them during daylight when they were weakest, stake them while they slept. We'd done it before, except this time there were 4, not 3. We missed 1. I remember the sound of Michiel's scream from the basement. By the time I got down the stairs, it was too late. The 4th vampire had him pinned, fangs buried in his neck. I put a stake through the creature's back, but the damage was done. Michiel survived, technically, but what came back wasn't Michiel anymore. I saw it in his eyes when they opened. The hunger, the emptiness. He still looked like my partner, still had all his memories, but something fundamental had changed. "Just go," he'd whispered, his voice already different. "I can feel it happening. I don't want you to see what comes next." I should have staked him then. That's what the training said. But I couldn't. I walked out of that basement and never saw him again. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, if he remembers who he was. After Phoenix, I worked alone. Partners became liabilities. Someone else to worry about, someone else who could get turned. The lesson cost Michiel his humanity, but it might have saved my life. The motorcycle vibrated beneath me as I pushed it a little faster. A sign indicated Seattle was 120 miles ahead. I'd learned other lessons over the years, each one carved into memory by close calls and narrow escapes. 5 years ago in Denver, I'd tried using conventional weapons against a vampire named Henry Brewer. I'd read reports that modern ammunition, hollow points specifically, could damage vampires enough to slow them down. The reports were wrong. I emptied an entire clip into Brewer's chest. He looked down at the holes in his shirt, then back at me, and laughed. The bullets passed through him like he was smoke, leaving no damage. I barely escaped, and only because I had a stake as backup. Traditional weapons existed for a reason. They worked when nothing else did. Then there was Morgan Bar in Chicago 3 years back. I'd been hunting her for a week, staying at a cheap motel on the south side. I was careful, never took the same route twice, paid cash, used a different name at check-in. Didn't matter. She found me anyway, tracked my scent right to my room door. I woke up to her standing over my bed at 3 in the morning, smiling with those 2 white teeth. "Hunters always forget," she'd said, her voice musical with a Brazilian accent. "Your smell is distinctive, fear and purpose, all mixed together." I survived that night by pure luck. I'd fallen asleep with a vial of holy water in my hand, splashed it in her face and made it out the window while she screamed. Lesson learned. Vampires could track by scent, and no amount of careful planning mattered if they caught your trail. Traffic thickened as I approached Olympia. I slowed the bike, weaving between cars with practiced ease. My wrist protested each time I squeezed the brake, but I ignored it. I thought about Tucker Freeman, a vampire lord I'd never encountered personally but had heard plenty about. Patrick had files on him going back centuries. Started in Portugal, moved through Europe, eventually settled in North America around 1900. Freeman was old school, territorial, patient. He'd spent 2 years hunting down a rival vampire who'd made the mistake of settling in one place too long. 2 years of methodical searching, testing defenses, learning patterns. When he finally struck, it wasn't just the rival who died, it was everyone connected to him. A message to others. That story shaped one of my most important rules. Never stay anywhere too long. 3 days maximum in any city after a kill. New name, new transportation, new appearance if possible. Over 20 years, I'd developed 8 rules for survival, 8 principles that kept me alive in a job where most didn't last 5 years. First, work alone. Partners became victims or liabilities. Second, trust traditional weapons, stakes, silver, holy water, garlic. Modern innovations were unreliable at best, deadly failures at worst. Third, hunt during daylight when possible. Vampires weren't helpless in daylight like the movies suggested, but they were weaker, slower. Fourth, leave no traces. Hotel rooms cleaned of fingerprints, fake names everywhere, cash only. Fifth, use garlic to control movement. It wouldn't kill them, but strategic placement could funnel them where I wanted. Sixth, holy water as a fence and defense. It burned them like acid, creating pain and distraction. Seventh, protect identity at all costs. No social media, no photos, no consistent appearance. And eighth, maybe most important, never stay anywhere too long after a hunt. 3 days maximum, then disappear. The road signs indicated Seattle was getting closer. Another hour, maybe less. I'd find a motel on the outskirts, pay cash, rest for a night. Tomorrow I'd pick up Patrick's information package from the drop point, a storage locker near the port district. A nest of vampires working together. That was unusual. Vampires were typically territorial, solitary predators. When they did form groups, it usually meant one thing: a leader, someone old enough, powerful enough to keep the others in line, someone smart enough to recognize the strategic advantage of coordination. The wind whipped harder as I pushed the motorcycle faster. My face stung where Amber's claws had cut me. My wrist throbbed. My ribs ached with each breath. Small prices to pay. I was alive, and she wasn't. I'd do it all again tomorrow and the day after that. This was my life, the only one I had left after 20 years of hunting. No friends, no home, no attachments. Just the next target, the next city, the next motel room. The solitude used to bother me. Not anymore. You can't miss what you've trained yourself to forget. Seattle's skyline appeared on the horizon, the Space Needle rising like a sentinel against the afternoon sky. Another city, another hunt. The weight of 2 decades pressed down on my shoulders, heavier than any duffel bag. I shifted in the seat, adjusting my grip to ease the pain in my wrist. The motorcycle responded instantly, leaning into the curve of the highway. I'd be in Seattle soon, and whatever waited for me there. I pulled into a rundown motel off Aurora Avenue, about 15 miles north of downtown Seattle. My wrist throbbed with every movement of the handlebars. The Kawasaki's engine ticked as it cooled down in the parking lot. The neon sign buzzed overhead. Evergreen Motor Lodge, with half the letters flickering. Perfect. Places like this never asked questions as long as you had cash. I grabbed my saddlebags with my good hand and walked to the office. A heavy-set guy with thinning hair sat behind bulletproof glass, watching something on a small TV. "Need a room," I said. "Ground floor." He barely looked up. "$70 a night, extra $20 for no paperwork." I slid 5 20s through the slot. 3 nights. He pushed a key attached to a plastic tag through the opening. Room 112, end of the building. The room smelled like cheap cleaner over cigarette smoke. Single bed, bathroom, small table with 1 chair. I locked the door, slid the chain in place, and dropped my bags on the bed. My face in the bathroom mirror looked worse than it felt. 3 parallel scratches ran across my left cheek, the butterfly bandages holding the edges together. Nothing that wouldn't heal. The wrist was more concerning, swollen and purple where Amber had nearly crushed it. I rewrapped the bandage tighter, swallowed 2 more painkillers, and sat on the bed. Time to call Patrick. I used the burner phone I'd picked up at a gas station outside Olympia. Patrick answered on the second ring. "St. Mary's Orphanage." "It's me," I said. "I'm in Seattle." "Evan." His voice softened. "How is Portland?" "Job's done. What's waiting for me here?" Patrick cleared his throat. 3 of them, working together. I sat straighter. "A nest? You're sure?" 5 victims in 3 weeks. Different hunting styles, same disposal methods. Bodies drained, dumped in shipping containers. Vampires rarely worked together. They were territorial, solitary predators. When they formed groups, it meant one thing: a leader strong enough to control the others. "Names?" I asked. 1 confirmed. Daniel Weiss, turned in 1973. The others are newer. All male, all hunting in the industrial district near the port. "Drop location?" "Same as last time. Storage unit 437 at Safekeep on Harbor Road, under the name Williams." I memorized the details. "I'll need 2 days. Wrist is bad. Be careful, Evan. A nest is different. They watch each other's backs." "I know." After hanging up, I spread a map of Seattle on the bed and circled the port district. 3 vampires meant more stakes, more holy water, different tactics, no more one-on-one confrontations. I slept fitfully, waking every few hours to check the locks and take more painkillers. 2 days later, my wrist had improved enough to grip a stake. The facial scratches were healing cleanly. I rode the Kawasaki to Safekeep storage, found Unit 437, and used the key Patrick had mailed to the facility months ago. Inside was a cardboard box containing everything I needed: a detailed map with 5 red X's marking body discovery sites, newspaper clippings about the murders, police reports Patrick had somehow obtained, and a manila folder with a grainy photo of Daniel Weiss. Thin face, dark hair, dead eyes. I spent the next 3 days on surveillance. Each morning I'd park the motorcycle in different locations around the port, watching warehouse entrances, tracking worker patterns. identifying cameras. I found the 5 dump sites, all shipping containers within half-a-mile radius of each other. By night, I observed the hunting grounds. The vampires preferred the stretch between 3 bars that served the dock workers. They hunted separately, but always within sight of each other. I spotted Daniel Weiss the second night, exactly like his photo, but with a predatory grace no camera could capture. On the third night, I identified the others. One was massive, built like a linebacker with a shaved head. The other was younger looking, maybe turned in his 20s with blonde hair. They communicated with subtle gestures, covering different areas but maintaining visual contact. I followed them back to their nest before dawn, an abandoned 3-story warehouse with boarded windows about a quarter mile from the water. They entered through a loading dock door that had been modified with a heavy padlock. On the 5th day, I prepared my equipment in the motel room. 8 steaks blessed with holy water, silver knife sharpened to a razor edge, 6 vials of holy water, garlic powder in 3 separate pouches, crucifix around my neck. I arrived at the warehouse at noon, when the sun was highest. Vampires were weakest during daylight, not the burning Hollywood myth, but sluggish, their senses dulled. The perfect time to hunt. I circled the building twice. 3 entry points, the main loading dock door, a fire escape leading to the 2nd floor, and a personnel door on the east side. I picked the lock on the personnel door and slipped inside, closing it quietly behind me. The interior was dark and smelled of rust, seawater, and something metallic. Old blood. I let my eyes adjust before switching on a small flashlight pointed at the floor. The main floor was mostly empty except for old machinery and shipping pallets. I moved carefully, listening for any sound. Nothing. They'd be in the darkest part of the building, as far from windows as possible. The stairs to the 2nd floor creaked despite my careful steps. I froze, waiting. Still nothing. The 2nd floor had been converted to living space, a couch, tables, empty bottles. Evidence of feeding, bloodstains on the floor that no one had bothered to clean properly. But no vampires. A metal door at the back of the 2nd floor led to a stairwell going down. The basement. Of course they'd be underground, away from any hint of daylight. I pulled out the garlic powder and sprinkled it along the top of the stairwell. When I reached the bottom, I made another line across the doorway. Containment was crucial with multiple targets. The basement was divided into 3 sections by concrete walls. Perfect. I could isolate them. I heard breathing from the far section. The deep, slow breathing of vampires in daylight rest. I sprinkled more garlic powder along each doorway, creating barriers they couldn't cross without intense pain. In the first section, I found the big one with the shaved head, lying on a mattress on the floor. His eyes were closed, body completely still except for the slight rise and fall of his chest. I positioned myself carefully, stake in my right hand. In a single motion, I drove it through his heart. His eyes flew open, black and inhuman, a silent scream on his lips. Then he crumbled to ash, the stake falling through the remains onto the mattress. 1 down. A hiss came from the 2nd section. The blonde one was awake, standing now, alerted by some sense that his companion was gone. "Hunter," he growled, eyes shifting from blue to solid black. I pulled another stake from my coat, backing toward the doorway where I'd placed the garlic. He charged, but pulled up short at the line of powder, snarling as the garlic forced him back. I used the moment to throw holy water at his face. It hit his forehead and left cheek, sizzling on contact. He screamed, clawing at his burning skin. I lunged forward, stake aimed at his heart, but he was faster than I expected. His hand shot out, catching my injured wrist. Pain exploded up my arm as he squeezed. I dropped to one knee, using his momentum to pull him forward across the garlic line. He howled as his feet touched the powder, momentarily loosening his grip. It was enough. I twisted free, drove the stake up under his ribcage. He gasped, eyes wide with shock, then disintegrated into ash. 2 down. A slow clap came from the 3rd section. Daniel Weiss stood in the doorway, fully awake now, watching me with ancient eyes. "Impressive," he said. "The church still sends its dogs, I see." I reached for another stake, but he was on me before I could grip it, moving with a speed that belied the daylight hour. His fist connected with my chest, sending me flying against the concrete wall. Something cracked in my back. I scrambled to my feet as he circled me. "You've killed my children," he said. "Do you know how long it takes to properly train a vampire? Years of teaching, molding." I pulled the silver knife from my belt. Didn't train them well enough. He smiled, showing fangs. Perhaps not. He attacked again, feinting left before coming in from the right. I slashed with the knife, catching his arm. The silver cut deep, making the wound smoke. Weiss hissed but didn't retreat. He caught my knife hand, twisting until I heard bones crack. The knife clattered to the floor. His other hand closed around my throat, lifting me off the ground. I'm going to drain you slowly. Then perhaps I'll turn you. Would you like that? To become what you hunt? Black spots danced in my vision as he squeezed. With my free hand, I reached into my coat, fingers closing around a vial of holy water. I smashed it against the side of his head. Weiss screamed, dropping me as the blessed liquid burned through his skin. I fell hard, lungs burning as I gasped for air. The knife lay 3 feet away. I lunged for it as Weiss recovered, half his face a bubbling, smoking ruin. He charged blindly, rage overcoming caution. I rolled to the side, slashing upward with the silver blade as he passed. The knife caught him across the neck, cutting deep. Not a complete decapitation, but enough. Weiss staggered, hands going to his throat as black blood poured out. He turned to me, eyes wide with disbelief, then fell to his knees. I forced myself up, ignoring the pain shooting through my body, and swung the knife again. This time, the head separated completely. Weiss's body crumbled to ash, the head following a moment later. I collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily. Everything hurt. Broken ribs again, probably. Fractured wrist for sure. But I was alive, and 3 vampires weren't. I gathered my remaining equipment, scattered the ashes, and limped toward the stairs. The hunt was over, but the war continued. It always did.